Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to take your sources, stack them up, and really unpack them to find the most interesting insights and knowledge for you. Today, we're jumping into the ambitious world of spaceflight, specifically SpaceX's ninth Starship test flight, Flight 9.
Yeah, and we've dug through quite a stack of your sources for this one mission, profiles, test results, even bits from the live launch coverage transcript, and a detailed flight progress report. Your mission, really, for this deep dive is to get a handle on what happened on this incredibly complex flight, what crucial lessons were learned, from the challenges, and maybe most importantly, why all this matters for the future of, well, getting us off this planet.
Right, because this wasn't just another launch, was it? It had that major, first reusing a super heavy booster and aimed for some big steps for the ship itself. It feels like they were really pushing the system hard this time. Okay, let's dive in and see what your sources reveal about, the ups and downs of Flight 9. So, first things first, setting the stage. What are the basics? What vehicles are we talking about? When did it launch? What were the main goals?
Right, so Flight 9, it was the ninth test flight in the overall Starship program. The specific hardware was Ship 35 paired with Booster 14-2, and the launch that happened May 27, 2025, just after 6:30 p.m. Central Time, lifting off from Starbase down in Texas.
And the plan for the ship, the upper stage, was that pretty much the same as recent flights?
Exactly, yeah. The ship was aiming for a suborbital flight path, targeting a splashdown way out in the Indian Ocean. It was also carrying something new, a planned payload. 8 Starlink simulators, basically test articles designed to be destructible. They were also meant to re-enter over the Indian Ocean. Getting those deployed successfully, that would have been a real landmark first for the program.
Okay, so the ship heads far downrange, but the booster 14-2, it had a different plan this time. No catch attempt.
Correct. No attempt to bring it back for a catch. The plan was for a splashdown much closer in the Gulf of Mexico. But even that wasn't the main focus for the booster on this flight.
Oh, what was its primary job then?
Its main goal was actually to perform a variety of experiments during its descent phase before that planned splashdown. Gathering data from those experiments was, well, a really critical part of the mission.
Okay, experiments. Now, to really get Flight 9, we probably need to look back a bit, right? At Flight 7 and 8, your sources said they had a similar mixed outcomes. What went wrong there?
Yeah, good point. Flight 7 back in January and Flight 8 in March. Both ran into major problems with the ship stage. In both cases, the ship basically exploded less than 10 minutes after launch. Debris ended up landing downrange, places like the Turks and Caicos, the Bahamas. But here's a really crucial thing, and your sources are clear on this. Even though the failures happened at a similar point in flight, they had fundamentally different root causes.
Wait, really? So it wasn't the same issue biting them twice? That feels significant?
It absolutely is. Flight 7, the problem was likely linked to something called a harmonic response. Think intense vibrations at specific frequencies causing unexpected stresses, maybe leading to propellant leaks. Flight 8, though, that was pinned down to a straightforward hardware failure inside one of the Raptor engines.
Okay, so vibrations and leaks versus an engine part failing. Totally different problems. How did SpaceX try to fix those before flying Flight 9?
Well, your sources say they took it seriously. They made significant hardware changes to address both of those potential failure modes. And they also did a number of engine trials on the ground to try and prove out their fixes. So
Yeah.
Flight 9 was really the big test. Did those changes work?
All right, so let's track Flight 9 itself. The launch, tell us about that.
Well, the site itself, familiar but always breathtaking, right? That massive 40-story rocket lifting off atop a pillar of flame. And importantly, all 33 Raptor engines on the Super Heavy booster were reported healthy at liftoff.
And the booster itself, that was a huge deal right from the start, wasn't it? The reuse aspect.
Oh, absolutely. A major milestone. First time SpaceX ever reused a Super Heavy for a flight. Booster 14-2, the one that flew on Flight 7. And what's really remarkable, they only had to swap out 4 of its 33 engines after that first flight. That means 29 engines on Flight 9 were already flight proven. Yeah. And this isn't just, a neat fact. Your sources stress the learning here. Lessons learned from the first booster refurbishment will enable faster turnarounds. The whole point is getting towards rapid reuse with minimal hands-on work. That's the game changer.
Okay.
And the separation of the two stages, that went okay?
Yes,
Thankfully. That critical phase stage separation happened right on schedule during the ascent. No issues reported there.
Okay, good. So, Ship 35 heads off towards space. Booster 14-2 turns back. You mentioned it had this somewhat different job with experiments. What were they trying to find out on its way down?
Right. It was doing a variety of experiments to gather data under some pretty unique conditions. For instance, they deliberately planned not to light one of the center engines for the final landing burn. They also did a specific controlled flip maneuver on its return rather than a more randomized one they might have done previously.
And it came through the atmosphere differently too, a different angle?
Yes, exactly. It hit the atmosphere at a
Yeah.
different angle, specifically described as a higher angle of attack. So picture it tilting back more as it comes down.
Why do that? Wouldn't
But,
that make it harder to steer? Seems counterintuitive.
well, it definitely adds complexity, yeah. But the purpose is to significantly increase the atmospheric drag on the booster. More drag means it slows down more effectively using the air itself, which means it needs less propellant for that final landing burn. The goal was explicitly stated as getting real-world data on how the booster is able to control its flight at this higher angle of attack. So yeah, these experiments, while really important for future efficiency, they definitely complicated Super Heavy's flight profile for this mission.
Okay, and that complexity, is that why they just planned for it to splash down in the Gulf rather than trying the risky catch maneuver back at the tower?
Precisely. Given the experimental nature of this descent, trying things like the high angle of attack, they opted for a hard splashdown in a designated safe zone in the Gulf of Mexico. Risking the launch infrastructure wasn't worth it for this test. As your sources kind of ominously put it, that was the plan anyway.
Uh-oh. That was the plan anyway. Usually means it didn't quite make it.
Unfortunately, no. The booster was lost. It happened about 6 minutes and 20 seconds into the flight, just after it had initiated its landing burn sequence. Your sources confirmed that the booster did demise before it could complete that burn. It broke apart over a designated splashdown area, but definitely short of a controlled splashdown. So that final phase of data collection was lost.
Okay, so the booster didn't make it. Let's switch focus to the ship then. Ship 35. How did it fare after separating and heading for space?
Well, the ship actually showed some real progress this time. Your sources say it improved its performance a bit compared to flights 7 and 8. It successfully reached space on its planned suborbital trajectory. And, very importantly, it made it all the way to scheduled ship engine cutoff, SECO.
Okay, that's progress, because that's where the last two failed,
Yeah.
right? Before SECO, so it got to space, reached orbital velocity as noted.
Yes, it achieved the necessary velocity even though the trajectory was suborbital. Making it through SECO was definitely called out as a big improvement over last flight. Big milestone. So after SECO, the plan was for it to coast for a while and then attempt that landmark deployment of the 8 dummy Starlink simulators.
Right, the payload deployment. Did that work out? Did they manage to release them?
Well, unfortunately, that's where a new problem surfaced. The payload door, the door that has to open to release the satellites, it couldn't open fully. Because of that malfunction, SpaceX had to abandon the deployment try. So while they got to the point in the mission where they could try, they ultimately will not get all the data it wanted from that specific payload test.
Always something new when you're pushing boundaries. Were there other experiments happening just on the ship itself?
Yes, definitely. Ship 35 was kind of a test bed. For example, they deliberately removed some of the heat shield tiles at what they called key points on one side.
Really? Why
Yeah.
would they do that?
To intentionally stress vulnerabilities on the system and gather extra data on how the underlying structure holds up to reentry heat without full protection there. The other side was mostly standard, providing a comparison. They were also trying out some different tile materials altogether, including metallic tiles and an actively cooled tile. That's pretty cutting-edge stuff, active cooling. Oh, and this ship was also the first one fitted with structural catch pins. Those are mainly for moving the giant vehicle around in places like the Mega Bay 2 assembly building. They weren't used for an actual catch on this flight, but it shows hardware integration progress.
Okay, so lots of tests baked in. But ultimately, how did Ship 35's journey end? Did it make the splashdown?
No. After that payload door issue, your sources say the flight got choppy for ship. It seems it eventually lost control. The report mentions several failures, including a loss of attitude control.
Loss of attitude control, so it couldn't point itself correctly. Why did that happen?
The primary cause identified was leaks. These leaks led to a loss of main tank pressure during the coast and reentry phase. Basically, without sufficient pressure, the fuel tanks can lose structural integrity, and you lose the ability to control the vehicle's orientation. Ship 35 ultimately disintegrated during reentry.
Wow, so really a mixed bag then, huh? Big steps forward, like reaching space in SECO, but then losing both the booster before splashdown and the ship during reentry. What's the overall feeling from SpaceX, based on your sources?
Yeah, definitely mixed. But the consistent message coming through is that for these developmental flights, the hardware itself, while obviously valuable, isn't the #1 priority. As the sources state pretty clearly, the primary payload for today is the data. That's what they're really after, transmitted down mostly via Starlink during the flight. And they're very open about how hard this is. Dan Hewitt from SpaceX Comms was quoted saying they're trying to do something that is impossibly hard, and that reaching the final goal is not going to reach it in a straight line. He added, we said there's going to be bumps, there's going to be turns.
Who's managing expectations?
Exactly. But you also hear the excitement about the progress. Jesse Anderson, a manufacturing engineering manager, said, seeing that ship in space today was a hell of a moment for us.
Yeah.
And she really nailed the company ethos. This is exactly the SpaceX way. Learn, iterate, and iterate over and over again until we figure it out.
And Elon Musk, what was his quick take on it?
His summary highlighted the positive. Starship made SECO, calling that a big improvement. He acknowledged the leaks causing pressure loss during coast and re-entry were the issue for the ship. But his overall conclusion was positive, stating there was a lot of good data to review.
Okay, so data gathered, lessons hopefully learned, even from the failures. What comes next? What are the immediate plans for the Starship program after Flight 9?
Well, the plan, unsurprisingly, is to bounce back and try again soon. They don't tend to wait around. In fact, Elon Musk himself has projected a really ambitious cadence, suggesting the next 3 Starship test launches could lift off every 3 to 4 weeks. Now, whether that happens is another question, but it shows their intent for rapid iteration.
Wow, 3 to 4 weeks. That's fast.
It is. And alongside flying the current Block 2 vehicles, there's significant work ongoing for the next major version, Block 3. Your sources mentioned Block 3 boosters are already being assembled. Booster 18 is expected to be the first V3 booster, and it's been seen under construction in Mega Bay 1. Ship 39 is thought to be the corresponding first Block 3 ship. Timeline-wise, the estimate is maybe 3 more Block 2 flights that would be ships 36, 37, 38 before we see Booster 18 and Ship 39 fly together. So maybe 4 flights from now might be the first flight of a full Block 3 stack. Could be later this year, potentially.
And what's the big deal about Block 3? What improvements are expected there?
Key things expected for Block 3 include integrating the hot staging ring directly into the booster design. Hot staging, where the ship lights its engines before separating, it's more efficient. Block 3 might also feature faster propellant loading, things like thicker pipes and better pumps and subcoolers to get that super chilled fuel loaded more quickly, which helps turnaround time. And just quickly on the regulatory side, the FAA confirmed they're aware of the anomaly, as they call it, from Flight 9. They're actively working with SpaceX on the event. Importantly, no reported public injuries or damage. The FAA will now work with SpaceX to see if a full, formal mishap investigation is needed. It's similar to Flight 8 that investigation wasn't technically closed, but the FAA still issued return-to-flight determinations allowing Flight 9, so it doesn't necessarily mean long delays.
Okay, got it. So let's bring this all back home for you listening. Why does this deep dive into one specific test flight, Flight 9, really matter?
Well, I think it's just a fantastic real-world example of what pushing the absolute limits of engineering looks like. It's messy, it involves setbacks, it's definitely not a smooth, straight path upwards. But every single test, every failure even, generates crucial data. Whether something works perfectly or breaks apart, you learn something. As Musk said, a lot of good data to review. And that data is how these incredibly complex systems eventually get perfected. It's the iterative process laid bare.
Yeah, think about it. They clearly fixed the different problems from Flight 7 and 8, right? The ship got much further this time, then bam, new issues crop up the payload door, the tank leaks later in flight. And they're not just reacting, they're designing tests into the flights, like taking off heat tiles or that tricky booster reentry. That's the whole learn, iterate approach you mentioned, building towards Block 3.
Exactly. It just underscores the sheer complexity. You're talking about reusing a rocket the size of a skyscraper, testing futuristic heat shields, doing operations in space. These are genuinely incredibly difficult engineering challenges.
And while it didn't end perfectly, with both vehicles splashing down or landing intact, you can't ignore the big steps forward either. Getting the ship to space, hitting that engine cut-off point, those were major hurdles cleared compared to the last. This deep dive, I think, really showcases that rapid iterative development philosophy playing out on a massive, very visible scale. It's engineering in fast forward almost. So here's a final thought for you to maybe chew on. SpaceX keeps saying the primary payload is the data. Elon Musk emphasizes the lot of good data to review, even after losing both vehicles. So, how much of the real progress in these early, higher risk test programs is actually measured by getting the hardware back safely versus the crucial insights you gain, the lessons learned from pushing the system right to its limits, even if that means the vehicle doesn't survive? Something to think about.